BWI is live here on YouTube. Good afternoon. Happy Labor Day. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr of BWI Live. The guys are with me here today to break down Penn State versus Wisconsin. We're putting a bow on Penn State's biggest win to open the season in a very long time. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Joining me today, we'll go around the horn here. Dave Eckert down there, kitty corner to me. Dave, good afternoon. Happy Labor Day. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, T. Frank. This is going to be fun. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's as we always know, it's always easier to talk about wins or blowout losses as long as things are pretty clear. An excellent writer here at Blue White Illustrated. That is Greg Pickel. He's below me on your screen. Say hello to the people, Greg.
Good afternoon. It's a good day for it.
And the person who is in the most Labor Day spirit of all of us, I am proud to have him bringing up the end of this introduction. He doesn't need one, but as always, when you don't need one, you get one anyway. That is Nate Bauer enjoying his Labor Day on the porch. You're doing it right. Why is it that every time we do this, you always do it right, Nate?
Listen, you got to make it work. And today is one of those situations. The wife is home, the kids are home, and I'm on the porch. So it's a nice day for the porch. We'll see what happens. Maybe some fire trucks will go by. I don't know.
Well, if that does, we know that somebody somewhere is having a good time. Or not.
That's exactly right.
At least something is happening. Which is not exactly what happened in the first half of Penn State versus Wisconsin, where it was 0-0 at halftime, and the Nittany Lions had under 50 yards of total offense. I want to get everyone's quick initial thoughts of the game and how it progressed in your eyes. So we'll go back around. Nate, let's start with you. What were your, general thoughts of the game now that we're 48 hours out from that, and you kind of had a chance to digest it?
Yeah, no, I think that, look, there are a couple of ways to look at this. The first is certainly I think fans were disappointed. I think Penn State was disappointed to not have been able to get something going offensively in the first half. No doubt. Right? Like, okay, guilty. However, Penn State just played and beat the number 12 team in the country at their place with 43 yards in the first half. Right? Like they just had one of the biggest wins that the program has had in really any of James Franklin's tenure, certainly in recent years. And they did so with this really, really lackluster offensive performance in the first half. So what does that say about the rest of the season? What does that say about what Mike Yurcich, his potential, and Clifford, Noah Cain, you name it, all of those different elements that Penn State expects to be good this season were not in the first half. They were in the second half. What does that mean moving forward?
Greg, to you, what were your initial thoughts of the game?
Yeah, so obviously I think Penn State wanted to start quicker on offense, but the key to me, guys, was that whether it was injuries to Jaquan Brisker or Jair Brown or Arnold Ebiketie, whether it was penalties, the personal fouls on A.J. Litton on special teams, which I think a lot of people will debate. Same thing goes for Ellis Brooks' targeting call, which, of course, kicked him out of the game late in a very important spot. We've seen Penn State at times be overcome by those moments, and instead they overcame them. And I think that says a lot about what this team can be in 2021. And it also answers some of the questions we had about whether they put 2020 behind them. The performance on Saturday, I think, certainly indicated that they did.
And Dave, finally wrapping up our initial thoughts on Penn State's 16-10 win over Wisconsin. And you pointed out something that I think is interesting about how they won the game as well, right?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what Nate and Greg said there, but I would also add that it's interesting because they won the way that they lost some of their more infuriating games last season, right? It always seemed like last season Penn State was, they were outgaining teams and they were losing because they weren't punching it in the red zone, and they were giving the ball away repeatedly. So for them to win a game where the other team could not score in the red zone and gave the ball away repeatedly while outgaining Penn State, I thought was kind of like an interesting sub note, just because, maybe that's a little bit of, the universe correcting itself after all of the nonsense that happened last season. I just thought that was weird. got interesting from
Yeah. It's always interesting, too, because a lot of people will say in those close games, when it's one or two plays, a lot of times that averages out. And for Penn State, especially recently, that hadn't happened until, as you point out, this game. We are BWI Live. I'm your host, Thomas Ryan Carr. The guys are with me. We're breaking down Penn State's win versus Wisconsin. And if you want your questions answered by the Blue White Illustrated staff, we are here to talk to you about the game and any other questions you might have about what's going on with Penn State football out of their first win of the season. So if you want to get your questions in the chat here on YouTube, the chat function is open and ready for you to use. We also have a new way for you to interact with us over here. Let me pull it up for you. It's called Super Chats. And what this is on YouTube is if you want to say thanks to the guys for working on Labor Day, putting on this show for you here on YouTube, you can donate to the channel, and that can keep us going and doing cool stuff and make sure we're bringing you all the fire hose of content that we're giving you. So if you want to subscribe to the Super Chat, all you got to do is give in your donation, and then when you give in your comment, that'll go into a special box that I have right here. Depending on how much you donate is how long it stays up in the box. We'll make sure, I can't ignore it, it's right there. We'll be getting your questions answered. And while we're waiting for those, we do have one. And Nate, it goes into something I wanted to talk to you about specifically, and it's what Matthew asks in the chat. Can Clifford get benched if he keeps going up with slow starts and inaccurate throws, or is he no good? Is there no good backup plan? So let's just talk about Sean Clifford. Let's just start the show, rip the Band-Aid off, and talk about Sean Clifford, because I want to get your thoughts on how he performed on Saturday.
Yeah. I mean, first, I just have to address the question first, because I think that there's this visceral take on the quarter position as a whole, right? Like, it's so easy to just think to yourself and to want to see someone else if the guy who's in that spot is not performing. But there's also a secondary reality of, what are you going to, right? What are your other options? Like, what realistically, what else is out there? And for Penn State on this roster, Sean Clifford is going to have to either be horrible, just dismal, or carried off on a stretcher for that to happen. That's just the reality of the situation. And so what I think that you brought up in your analysis piece today that was very insightful is he didn't even have an opportunity to be that bad in the first half, right? Like, they had so few plays. They ran 22 offensive plays, and they were constantly in third and long because the running game wasn't going. And what Wisconsin was doing defensively gave them so much trouble up front that it never really opened that door for him to perform. So, yeah, I mean, I'm very, very wary and cautious on any conversation. Like, Sean Clifford is the guy, point blank, period. That's it. That's what Penn State has this year, and they're going to have to go with it. And to be honest with you, for Penn State fans, the perception should be that you're pulling for him as hard as you've ever pulled for anybody, because if he's not going, your program isn't going.
Yeah, and I think you saw in the second half, he can get hot. When he does get hot, things can happen for the Penn State offense. Let me ask you, Greg, because this is we're going to sit on this topic of Sean Clifford for a little bit, because it's what everyone wants to know. Do you think he played poorly in that game, or do you think he played better than fans are giving him credit for, given what we just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to make it so simple, but 0 turnovers, 0 interceptions, 0 fumbles. And to me, that's all you need from him. I think, obviously, look, what was he, 18-33? I'm pulling it up now, 247 yards, the touchdown to Dotson. Did he make a few throws behind guys downfield? Did he miss Dotson a couple times? Yeah, of course. But in the first half, they were so behind the 8 ball with being 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9, 3rd and 7 that there's not many offenses that are going to function at a high level. And when they changed the play calling a bit in the second half and got more to the sidelines instead of trying to go up the middle, they stayed out of those situations and that allowed him to be better. So, look, we saw some of the things that plagued him last year. I'm not saying we didn't, whether it was the happy feet, whether it was not going to a second or third read, whether it was some inaccuracy. But overall, he played a winning game. And I think that's a takeaway from this. And if you want to spend time talking
way he plays football, and as you pointed out, the turnovers, that's part of it. I want to go to Dave because I want to get your thoughts on the other part of what might cause Sean Clifford to be good or to be bad.
Wisconsin defense that we knew would be physical, that we knew would kind of try to control the trenches. But, yeah, it wasn't good enough. It just, period. You look – I think actually, if you look at the PFF ratings, PFF actually rates them better in run blocking than they were at pass blocking, which kind of surprised me because just happened. And then you look at the pass game or the pass blocking aspect of it, and they gave up 2 sacks, but that's not the end of the world. But certainly, it could have been more. Sean Clifford was not comfortable in the pocket. And granted, I think some of that came from their inability to run the ball, right? It's 3rd and 9. You allow the opposition to tee off on you. You just do. So, yeah, I didn't think it was amazing. I thought it was a little bit better once they kind of opted for Eric Wilson. I thought he was solid. That rotation at guard there between him and Anthony Wiggin didn't really last very long. If you look at the snap counts, Eric Wilson got the vast majority of the snaps there. But
we are going to be answering your questions here and the offensive line, but it all kind of comes together, and that is the offensive play calling. What did you get from Mike Yurcich in his first game as offensive coordinator for the Nittany Lions? What was your opinion of how he did?
Yeah, I went back and watched the game, Frank, and the more I watched it, the more it felt to me like the first half was almost a trial run to make sure he knew what he was working with, to kind of feel some things out. They didn't do much. What they did in the first half, they did hardly any of in the second half, and I have to think that may have been by design. I just don't – looking back at it, I think the second half is what we're going to see this Penn State offense be, what Mike Yurcich wants it to be, how it's supposed to look. The first half was a little bit more – shall we say, kind of like what we saw last year in some ways. And the protection obviously wasn't great, and the play calling felt a little bit disjointed and a little bit rigid. And then in the second half, they decided to say, you know what, we're going to change course here. It's what you and Tom talked about after the game. We're going to go a different direction and not run it Wisconsin's strength. And when we talk about the offensive line and some of these other things, I just think it's important to remember that Wisconsin is one of the better defenses Penn State will see this year. So the fact that they gave Penn State some problems, I know that is a problem for fans, and I get it. They have stuff to clean up. But at the same time, it felt like they gave up more than 2 sacks, but they didn't. And there were some quarterback hurries in the first half, of course. And maybe there were some runs that didn't go as far as people wanted, and they never really got the ground game going. But all told, I think the second half offers as much hope as anything for Penn State fans moving forward in 2021. And when you really break it down, I think you can toss the first half out the window. We could see something different next week. And if they do the same thing in the first half next week, that would be concerning. But that's where I'm at on it for now.
Nate, you talked to Mike Yurcich this offseason in the summer, and I guess were you surprised by the way the first half played out with, kind of the sense that you had been getting for who Mike Yurcich was as an offensive play caller?
No, and because I defer to the guys who have lived it. So when you and I had Matt Malloy on the show, and he made it absolutely plain that getting off ground as an offense with a new coordinator is extremely challenging, right? He pointed to the 2012 season and how hard it was with Bill O'Brien to get that thing going. They lost their first 2 games. And so all of the indicators through the preseason, just the, kind of that undercurrent from within the program was the defense. And look, like, this is not rocket science, and it's not something that should be new or different, but the defense was ahead of the offense.
Right.
That's how it goes. That is what college football looks like. Georgia and Clemson played a dismally boring game for that reason. The defenses are ahead of the offense. That's just how it is right now. So, was I surprised that they didn't have any success? Maybe a little, but I also wasn't completely surprised that Wisconsin knew and made a decision on how they wanted Penn State to beat them, right? Sean Clifford had to be the guy that was going to beat them. They had to beat them through the air, and they were daring Penn State to throw the ball. And so Penn State was doing maybe the conservative approach a little bit in the first half. Surprised me that they didn't take more shots. They did take one in the first half. So maybe that was a little bit fewer. But again, they just had the ball for so few snaps because Wisconsin dominated time of possession and dominated the possessions in the first half.
We're BWI live here today on YouTube. I want to thank you all, everyone who's sticking with us. I know we're having some issues with our streaming rate and all that stuff. We're trying new stuff here on the YouTube channel. So this is the first time we've done a show with 4 people at the same time, working through some technical issues. But appreciate you sticking with us. Dave, I want to ask you something that's come up in the chat. That was from Stephen Lisco. He asked, do you think that Wisconsin will be the best and most complete defense that Penn State sees this year? What's your thought on that?
I don't know about that. Just because Ohio State, right? I mean, that's the answer to the question. Ohio State's defense is going to be much more talented, much more athletic, as it always is. I mean, it's just the way that they recruit is just much better than anyone else in the Big Ten. So I expect that defense to be a bigger challenge. Whether the game will take the same shape as this one, where you've kind of got. You have limited opportunities. Wisconsin is dominating the time of possession, so you just don't have that many chances to score, and as a result, you've only got 16 points at the end of the game. The Ohio State game might not look like that. Penn State might have more points at the end of that game by virtue of having more chances. But from a talent and personnel standpoint, I think it's Ohio State, and I don't think it's close, to be honest.
So let's take a look at the Penn State defense. We spent a good amount of time talking about the Penn State offense. And Nate, we'll start with you when it comes to the defensive performance in the secondary. What is your opinion of their performance, knowing that the corners did get thrown on a little bit in that game, but overall the Penn State secondary, I assume you would imagine. I would imagine you assume they had a good game, correct?
Yeah, very much so. Let me pull up the stat just so I don't get it wrong. Wisconsin did not complete a pass bigger than 23 yards. Right? 23, 17, and 16 were their longest pass completions. And they only had 3 over 15 yards. Allegorical terms, but, there was redemption, right? Like, Jaquan Brisker catching the interception is redemption for him from last season. It's redemption for Tig Brown to come down with those game-sealing interceptions. Like, that was the element that was missing for that secondary all last season. They just had opportunities to make these game-changing plays last year that just, for whatever reason, one reason or another, just did not come to fruition. And Saturday they did. And if they can continue to do that, Anthony Poindexter this offseason called them life-changing plays. Player changes dramatically by your ability to either catch that interception or not. And Penn State did it twice on Saturday.
Greg, I want to go to you now because I want to know there were some big moments where the game changed a couple of times. But I want to go to what was your key moment in the game on Saturday?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different ways you could go here, but for me, it was Jaquan Brisker's interception, and I know Penn State had to face another series after that because the offense for yet another year could not, as James Franklin might say, end the game on their terms. But that Brisker interception, I think, Penn State's deep a ton of juice, even though it was on the field for so much, and the difference to me was that interception reinforced everything they had done previously, and I think it gave them the final jolt of confidence, jolt of juice that they needed to stand up for one more series. And when Ebike gets the pass rush that forces the intentional punting, I think that fuel for that push comes from Jaquan Brisker's interception. In the return, I think Nate pointed it out to me on the plane yesterday, but if he doesn't bring it out as far back as he did, and then Penn State's offense does what it did, Wisconsin would have had a much shorter field to work with. Jordan Stout obviously is going to get some flack for the field goal kicking and the extra point kicking, but his punting was tremendous. And getting out as far as he did helped flip the field enough to make a difference. So that was the moment for me that stands out.
What was there anything, and I apologize, going back to you again, Greg, I kind of put you on the spot here. A couple questions in the chat that I think are important. Was there any clarification on why Jordan Stout was kicking all the kicks, even though, no. Traditionally been 40 and under, it had been Jake Pinniger, and was there any reason why given why John Lovett didn't make the trip as well? A couple of news and notes. I wondered if you got any information post-game. Yeah,
no reason for Lovett, Hakeem Beamon, and Keaton Ellis all not traveling. I don't think Fred Hansen traveled either. I have the travel roster here. He did travel. I'm sorry. So we strike that. But Beamon obviously not on the trip. Salim Wormley was who I was thinking of. He didn't travel either. No reason given for any of those. As for Pinniger, he was available. He was there. We watched him warm up. For whatever reason, the system that worked well, I think the last year and previously was not used this year. The only logical conclusion I can draw is that Jordan Stout must have just won every job in camp, which we'll find out more Tuesday when James Franklin talks. But yeah, that was surprising to me, and certainly you don't want to be going into week 2 having that conversation, I don't think, but it's one that has to be had now. I know the hold was primarily the problem on the extra point, but still, there's going to be a lot of questions about that kicking game moving forward, even though the punting part of it led Jordan Stout to be the Big Ten specialist of week 1.
Yeah, and I got called out one time earlier this year.
Early in the third quarter, just because it was the point in the game for me where I said, okay, this offense can do something. This offense is capable of moving the ball against this defense, and Penn State is capable of winning this game. Obviously, there were several more steps after that touchdown necessary in order to wrap up the victory, obviously. But I guess I just think, for me, that was the point where I felt like Penn State had a chance, and it sounds bad to say in a 0-0 game. I did not feel that way in the first half. It seemed pretty inevitable that Wisconsin's offense was just going to wear down Penn State's defense and continue to just kind of stifle the offense that it had in the first half. And, once Penn State showed me that wasn't going to be the case, then I was like, okay, Penn State can win this game. So for me, that's the moment that I kind of come away from the game thinking about. So that's a big time play from John Dodson, and a pretty good throw from Sean Clifford.
So we're gonna wrap up here in just a little bit with BWI Live. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Thank you for sitting through our technical difficulties. We have Nate Bauer, but for some reason he's disappeared. I'm going to go to Greg then. Greg, who was your game MVP on Saturday?
Yeah, there's so many different ways you could go here, right? I mean, there were so many, and people were talking about it in the chat, guys, but there were so many individuals who played such a key role in this game. I'm going to go with Arnold Ebiketie. I know that obviously you could go, like I said, with a number of different players here, but the blocked field goal, obviously enormous in a game that came down to 6 points, could have been down to less than that potentially. So very big deal in a game that turned out to be just a 6-point contest.
Dave, we'll get your team MVP here in just 1 second. Doing some stuff live on air, so I apologize. Let's see if we can get Nate back in the show here. And let's see, 3, 2, 1.
Nate's pick would have been mine, but anyway, I thought Jahan Dotson was great. Another game of over 100 receiving yards, big plays. It was very obvious that once Penn State kind of took the top off the offense that, Wisconsin's secondary was not equipped to handle him. I thought he was excellent. So on the offensive side of the ball, I don't really think that's the question. It's got to be Jahan.
I mean, the last thing I can think of is like Alabama against Ohio State in a playoff last year of guys that it felt like you couldn't cover him. So, I think as much as you said you got the third straw, I kind of like yours. His production was incredibly limited because of the situation. He could have had 200 yards in that game. I'm pretty convinced he could have had 200 yards. We'll wrap up with Nate, Mr. Bauer. Who is your game MVP?
I got the first pick. and I went with Jaquan Brisker. Not sure how it could be anybody else, to be honest with you. I mean, first of all, not the game sealing interception, but the one that obviously put Penn State in a position to win that game. And also, I mean, just the fact that he was hurt. Very clearly he was playing through injury in that game to have 3 injury timeouts. I think in the first half alone, clearly gutted one out, made the big play, and just in general was around the ball constantly. I don't know exactly what his final stats were in terms of tackles, but just a great game for him.
That'll do it today for your BWI Live Labor Day show. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today, for asking questions in the chat. Thank you for participating in our first live show here during the week. We're going to be doing more of these. And again, thank you for your patience with some of the issues we're having with the stream today. That's the BWI Live show for Nate Bauer, Greg Pickel, Dave Eckert. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. We will be back again soon.